there are documents in there that were a threat to national security, then that would be a punishment of up to 10 years in prison per document. That would be a very, very minor offense compared to the rest. That is a fine of up to $1,000 and up to 6 months in prison. If this charge sticks, that is up to 5 years in prison. In this case, it would be potentially up to 20 years in prison per offense. Now, possibly up to 3 years in prison per document, a potential conviction, a ban on holding federal office. Though some experts argue that banning someone from holding federal office, at least on this kind of charge, would be unconstitutional. But that would definitely be a charge that would be very, very interesting for, anyone who doesn't want Trump to run again. So, unless you've been living under a rock, you probably already know at least the theme of what I'm going to talk about. You probably already know that, yes, indeed, Trump is claiming that he's had access to leaks from the Justice Department, that his arrest is imminent. He's predicted Tuesday, if I recall correctly, from his tweets.
An attorney for former President Trump blames the media for Trump's claim that he'll be arrested on Tuesday in Manhattan. In a statement to CNN, Joe Tacopina says, "No one tells us anything, which is very frustrating." President Trump is basing his response on press reports and the fact that this is a political prosecution and the DA leaks things to the press instead of communicating to the lawyers as they should. Now, this drama began earlier today on Trump's Truth Social page. After predicting his arrest on Tuesday, the former president urged his supporters to, quote, "take back our nation." And tonight, his campaign is already fundraising off of his claims, which have not been confirmed. There's no indication that he will be arrested Tuesday. Now, sources tell me and my colleague Kristen Holmes.
Oh, it's Tuesday. Yeah.
Team has gotten
Wait, that's what I
no
said.
word
Yeah.
from the Manhattan District Attorney's Office about the timing of any possible indictment. Another source says the former president has been pushing his team to get the base riled up over the idea because he believes it would help him politically. He says it is.
That was a perfectly timed no. In a social media post, Trump, referring to himself, said the leading Republican candidate and former president of the U.S. will be arrested on Tuesday of next week. So because of this, there's been a lot of speculation about what the arrest is going to be specifically about and how it's going to happen. I personally, when we were covering the January 6th committee, I personally called out the January 6th committee for being just a symbolic procedure. Which that's not really a hot take, right? That is just some reality. And on top of that, I honestly still believe that there is a strong counter-incentive to doing anything to Trump. Look at it like this. Trump has successfully convinced a large swath of the American population that the elections were stolen. It was rampant voter fraud. Biden is corrupt and doing a disservice to the American people. That the Democrats are corrupt and doing a disservice to the American people. That the Democrats are traitors to the United States. So on and so forth. With all this, it's not a hard sell to make those same people convinced that Trump's arrest and Trump's trial will be a political show. Well, all he needs to do is tell them that he's facing a kangaroo court to decredibilize the whole process to his voter base. And I'm afraid. I'm afraid for that. I'm afraid because I do think that there is going to be a large part of the population that is never going to see any sort of criminal procedure as legitimate. Why does that matter? Well, I don't think that matters if you believe in justice, but I believe that matters if you if you see things from a more, let's say, realistic, in the kind of transposing the realism of international relations to local politics, in the sense that you are making a calculation. If you're a prosecutor, if you're a politician supporting the prosecution, you're making a calculation that the fallout of the criminal process is going to be weaker than the benefits. You're making the calculation that the riots, that the protests, that the pushback against it is not going to be strong enough to imperil the institutions, to imperil trust in the institutions for most American people, etc., etc. It is a gamble, is what I'm trying to say. It is a gamble. I think it's a safer gamble than Macron's gamble, if we're going to compare both, but it still is a bit of a gamble. And I personally was expecting the Justice Department in general to be, sorry to put it this way, a bit of a pussy about the whole situation and not even touch him. most countries don't touch former politicians when it comes to legal proceedings. Because of exactly this. They don't want to decredibilize the court, to politicize court decisions. But it seems like that's not necessarily the case. So, one of the main things I've been looking into, there's all sorts of articles and speculation. So there's been all sorts of articles and speculation about whether Trump's going to be arrested, what's he going to be arrested for. There's been some statements from different district attorneys, from different representatives of the Justice Department, etc. And I have kind of compiled what interested me. I've kind of compiled a list of what are the potential legal ramifications, legal indictments that Trump can be subjected to. So we're going to be going through the list one by one. First of all, the one that concerns the New York prosecution specifically, that is almost certainly what Trump is referring to in his Truth Social rants, the Stormy Daniels hush money. So right before the presidential campaign, Trump has allegedly paid $130,000 to Stormy Daniels in order to silence her with regards to their sexual adventures. The problem is that the Trump organization reimbursed Trump's expenses when it comes to those $130,000 paid to Mrs. Daniels, meaning that he used what were basically supposed to be, or were presented as a legal retainer in the tax papers, in the tax paperwork, were actually hush money to Stormy Daniels, meaning it is bookkeeping fraud. Honestly, bookkeeping fraud is a misdemeanor. It's only a felony if there is also another crime that is attached to the fraud that Trump has committed. Meaning that very likely it's not going to be a big punishment unless the prosecutor's, the district attorney's office has something else on top of him, like Stormy Daniels was on top of him. They also have a bit of a legal conundrum when it comes to this. The bookkeeping fraud, since the filing is from the New York District Attorney's office, it's concerning money that was spent within the process of a federal campaign, meaning that you're trying to apply state penal law on what should actually technically be more of a federal crime, which my understanding is that might not be accepted by the court in the first place. So I'm not quite sure what the legal framework is going to be for the prosecution, given that inconsistency. Now you're going to say, hey, that's just a technicality, but we all know the law is made of technicalities. Now on top of that, a misdemeanor is up to 1 year in prison and fines. Or fines, specifically, or fines. Probably not going to be sent to prison over a little fraud. We know white-collar crime doesn't really get punished in that way, usually. So we're not talking about, anything that's a very, very serious charge. Unless they have a second crime added that turns it into a felony, in which case it could be up to 4 years in prison. On top of that, I did some of my own research to look up federal law because of this conundrum of how do you apply state penal law to what was actually a federal offense. Title 18, U.S. Code 1519, could perhaps apply, according to my layperson's reading of the law. Title 18, U.S. Code 1519, destruction, alteration, or falsification of records in federal investigations. We definitely have the falsification of records, since we have a false statement as the purpose of payments within the course of a federal campaign. However, I'm not quite certain that this law is going to apply to the situation. And in any case, this law is a federal law. This is not a law that will apply within a New York State court situation. This is just some independent research I did. I'm not even sure, since this mostly concerns impeding an investigation, which we'll talk about later. I'm not sure this even applies to the specific falsification with regards to the payments to Stormy Daniels. The second potential the second potential strategy that the prosecutors can use to attack Trump, this time on a federal level. Jack Smith, the special counsel of the federal Justice Department, has been investigating Trump with regards to the Mar-A-Lago classified documents that have been seized, in Mar-A-Lago. So, the issue is that unauthorized retention of national security documents is a felony. However, it does require prosecution to demonstrate that those documents were related to national defense. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. If those documents were simply, I have to make the comparison to Hillary Clinton's email server. If those documents are just like random emails talking about meeting up at a pizza joint to have like lunch, those aren't issues of national defense. Those wouldn't count for the unauthorized retention of national security documents. I think it was 103 documents that were found in Mar-A-Lago. If there are documents in there that were a threat to national security, then that would be a punishment of up to 10 years in prison per document. So that could actually be a very serious charge if and only if some of those documents do concern national security. A second potential charge concerning those documents is the fact that he concealed records in order to obstruct an official effort. In this case, there were two official efforts that were obstructed. On the one hand, the National Archives seeking custody of presidential records, which they do after every single presidential term, and the Justice Department's subpoena for classified documents, which, if you recall, Trump's lawyer had returned documents to the Justice Department over that subpoena. However, 103 documents remained in Mar-A-Lago. So it's in that way that records were concealed. In this case, it would be potentially up to 20 years in prison per offense. Now, per offense, I'm not sure if that doesn't seem to mean per document. Since it's a single offense, that would just be well, it's still a very heavy penalty, up to 20 years in prison. Finally, once again, regarding the subpoena, Trump could be accused of contempt of court for not respecting the subpoena of May 2022, ordering the return of those documents. In this case, that would be a very, very minor offense compared to the rest. That is a fine of up to $1,000 and up to 6 months in prison. The problem with all those three cases, however, is that the prosecution will have the responsibility of showing that Trump knew about the documents and that he intentionally hid them or instructed to hide them from either the subpoena or the National Archives, etc., etc. So as long as Trump has plausible deniability with regards to any of those three crimes, none of those charges can stick to him. And, well, showing intent, showing knowledge, those are pretty high bars when it comes to proving a crime. So those would not be easy crimes to nail him on. Finally, concerning the same documents, there is a potential charge of mishandling official documents, since there have been testimonies from former aides, as well as the National Archive, that have shown that have stated that documents that Trump was responsible for were destroyed, which is illegal. Possibly up to 3 years in prison per document, a potential conviction, a ban on holding federal office. Though some experts argue that banning someone from holding federal office, at least on this kind of charge, would be unconstitutional. Definitely, we all know Trump would fight ban of being able to run for federal office, but that would definitely be a charge that would be very, very interesting for anyone who doesn't want Trump to run again, including DeSantis. Well, yeah. Finally, concerning the documents, there could be a charge of conspiracy to make a false statement because Trump and his lawyer Corcoran, who had submitted the only part of the documents to the Justice Department when they subpoenaed him, might have both known and agreed to lie about there still being documents in the Mar-A-Lago. If this charge sticks, that is up to 5 years in prison. Now, an interesting part concerning all of those investigations is that Trump's lawyer, Mr. Corcoran, has had his attorney-client privilege waived for those investigations specifically, meaning he can no longer stay silent. He can be subpoenaed within the legal process. So that is actually really, really big. The lawyer should be privy to key information concerning those crimes if those crimes actually occurred, if Trump had knowledge of them, etc., etc., if there was conspiracy with this lawyer. So Mr. Corcoran's testimony is going to be probably central to whether there are going to be any real charges behind the Mar-A-Lago documents. NYC barricades went up a few minutes ago. Interesting. We'll go back in and cover the latest news concerning the Manhattan courts once we're done going through the list. Now, another angle of attack against Trump would be the January 6th insurrection, also handled by Jack Smith's counsel of the Justice Department within the Justice Department's investigation. We don't have any public statements concerning the Justice Department's investigation, but we can make some educated guesses as to what the investigation is centered upon based on the January 6th House Committee hearings, that some of which we've covered here on stream. The House Committee hearings basically came upon several key potential offenses. So, for example, obstruction of an official proceeding, which is the charge that 300 January 6th rioters were hit with. Trump obviously didn't participate directly within the riot. However, the House Committee hearings have considered that him summoning his supporters near the White House and then urging them on to march to the Capitol, as well as calling on them literally to fight like hell, could be grounds to charge him with obstruction of an official proceeding. The official proceeding in question being Mike Pence's swearing in or certification of Biden's victory. Obviously, the defense would be plausible deniability. In the same speech where Trump called for them to fight like hell, Trump also asked them to protest peacefully. If this charge can stick, Trump is liable for up to 20 years in prison. Potential obstruction of official proceedings was the appointment of alternative electors within the elector system of the U.S. presidential elections, and pressuring Pence to cite those alternative electors instead of following the normal democratic process within the American system. The January 6th committee did show that Trump was told that there was no truth to his stolen election claims, but Trump's defense might be that he did consult with one lawyer, John Eastman, who did advise him positively to take those steps. So Trump could basically lay the blame at the feet of this lawyer, John Eastman. Conspiracy to defraud the United States, potentially up to 5 years in prison for this one, since it was shown that Trump consulted with various lawyers and aides to try to prevent certification of Biden's victory. The committee argued that Trump's deceitful intent can be proven, since he was repeatedly told that the allegations of voter fraud were baseless. If anyone who's followed the January 6th committee hearings did see many testimonies, many aides, even people important in the GOP, people who had skin in the game, telling Trump those voter fraud allegations, they're not helping and they are baseless, they're wrong. However, I suspect that Trump's defense would be very similar as well. He could turn to Rudy Giuliani, to John Eastman, to different people, different yes men he consulted, in order to claim that, hey, that there was still a plausible world where he had a reason to believe that there was fraud. Conspiracy to make a false statement, which also depends on proving Trump's intentions and him understanding him making a false statement beyond a reasonable doubt, which would be also very hard to make stick. This one being probably the hardest, politically speaking, to make stick, is that it is a crime to incite, assist, aid, and comfort an insurrection against the authority and laws of the federal government. The January 6th hearings notably showed that how Trump refused for hours to call off the rioters despite aides imploring him to, and that he even directed an inflammatory tweet at Pence during the event. However, despite the committee bringing this up, none of the January 6th defendants were accused of insurrection, even those charged with seditious conspiracy. I don't think this would necessarily stick. This one specifically would be up to 10 years plus fines. Is he not being charged with inciting a riot? Right now, he's not being charged with anything. Right now, the speculation is that he's going to be charged with falsifying accounting documents with regards to the Stormy Daniels hush money. That is the main thing that he's almost certainly going to be charged with. And that misdemeanor, doing in Jafar, is not beyond the statute of limitations. So the state of New York has a statute of limitations, if I recall correctly, of 2 years on a misdemeanor like this one, like the fraud committed with regards to Stormy Daniels' money. However, the statute of limitations has several caveats. First of all, during COVID, there was a 1-year extension to all statutes of limitations. Secondly, the state of New York extends the statute of limitations. Person concerned, the person accused, has been living outside of the state of New York. And it just so happens that the falsification happened right before Trump's election, if I recall correctly, meaning he's lived in the White House and then also in Florida. So it just my understanding is that it pretty much lines up so that the charges that the New York State attorney is going to bring against Trump are still within the statute of limitations, with all those extensions piled on top of each other. We're looking at several years of extension of the statute of limitations. So no, it still will stick, Dune Jafar. You're wrong to bring that up. Oh, and wait. I forgot one of the... I forgot one last angle. All right, one last angle when it comes to the possible prosecution of Donald Trump is the investigation into Georgia election law by DA Fannie T. Willis of Fulton County, Georgia. She is currently looking into election code law violations potentially committed by Trump's campaign in Georgia. Most of them being misdemeanors. However, if it can be shown that there was conspiracy to violate a provision or solicitation to commit fraud, those become felony. And a second potential angle, which Ms. Willis has stated she's considering, is racketeering charges under Georgia's RICO Act, which would require to show Trump that Trump conspired with others or engaged in 2 or more offenses from the RICO Act list, including solicitation, forgery, false statements to state officials. We don't have any more details on what those false statements would specifically be or what that solicitation is going to be, but we can pretty reasonably try to guess that some of it will have to do with that most of it will have to do with the efforts to overturn Georgia's election results. We know that Trump was frantically calling state officials, contacts he's had, judges, anything he could grasp at in order to create pressure against the election results. And some of that pressure might be eventually interpreted as solicitation or a form of racketeering. So perhaps there is a validity to that angle as well. Is Trump going to share a cell with Andrew Tate? That is what we want to know.